What's up everyone, Ryan from Oakland Ghosts, and today I'm going to share with you how to build the ultimate DAW-less setup. But before we do that, let's get a couple things out of the way. Number one, all the gear that I'm going to show you today, I purchased with my own money. Now, I'm not Bob Eats over here. I've got like 600-700 subscribers, so no one's sending me anything to shill to you guys. Although that said, Moog, if you're listening and you want to send me a Labyrinth or Pittsburgh Modular, if you want to, send me a Voltage Lab 2 to review, I'll shill the out of that. Secondly, I realized that my ultimate DAW-less setup might not be your ultimate DAW-less setup. There's a lot of reasons to go outside of the box, not least of which is what type of music you're playing, whether you're performing live or recording, or just what your preferred workflow is. So every perfect ultimate setup is going to be a little bit different. But I do think a lot of the principles and thought that I put behind what pieces of gear I chose for my ultimate setup are universal and can go a long way in preventing you from experiencing gas. Now, before I show you what my ultimate setup is, first we have to answer one question. Why DAW-less? Why go DAW-less at all? Why go outside of the box when, with a decent MIDI controller and a good DAW, you can do just about anything I could do outside of the box for lots cheaper? I never really intended to go outside of the box, but leaving it has given me this whole freedom of creativity. Being able to use pieces of gear that are intended solely for the purpose of making music has opened up creative doors and creative accidents and just other possibilities that I felt I was lacking staring at a blank session screen on a DAW. Now, if you're looking to get your feet wet in the DAW-less world, this is a perfect piece of gear because it's effectively a DAW in a box, and that piece of gear is the Synthstrom Deluge. Now, the Synthstrom Deluge is geared as a kind of all-in-one groove box, and that it totally is. You've got a synth engine, it's a sequencer, you can record into it, it's a sampler, it supports multi-sampling, but it's also an arranger and a sequencer and just so much more, and keeps getting better and better since it went open source community firmware. So when I got the Deluge, I didn't intend to go DAW-less. I simply wanted a piece of gear that was kind of cool, looked fun, had lots of blinky lights, and that I could take on vacation or when I'm just sitting on the couch and just want to kind of sketch something out. What I found was the freedom of working on a piece of gear that was intended simply to make music and is intuitively laid out made me not want to work in my DAW at all anymore. Now, if you're going to go DAW-less, you're going to need a sequencer. The Deluge is probably one of the best in market sequencers, and for that alone, it's almost worth the price of admission. But on top of that, you still have a drum machine, you still have a sampler, you still have additional synths. You can do everything that you could do on a DAW simply on this piece of gear. Now, one of the principles I decided after I realized I wanted to go the DAW-less route was any piece of gear I got has to do something different than the existing gear that I already have. I didn't want a whole lot of overlap. Number two, I want stuff that's versatile. So the second piece of gear that I got was the 1010 Nanobox Lemondrop. At the time, I was playing with the Deluge and trying to figure out how to make it do granular synthesis. And it was possible even before the firmware update that added it. But it was very convoluted and it was kind of hacky, and although you could get it to kind of do it, it wasn't ideal. But I was fascinated with the sounds I was getting. Most granular synthesizers are digital, meaning VSTs. There are a couple hardware options, but they're pretty expensive and they're not ideal until 1010 came out with this awesome little box. It offers granular synthesis on 2 channels, as well as an additional oscillator that you can use with your typical sine wave, square wave, triangle, noise, whatever you want. A host of different effects and filters and so many different ways that you can modulate them that it's just bananas. And the presets alone are freaking awesome. I've used mostly presets in my songs, and I haven't even dug too deep into building my own sounds yet, but every time I do, it's just fun. It's just such a weird way to do synthesis. So adding granular synthesis, that was something that the Deluge didn't offer. So there's my no overlap rule. Second thing is it can also be used like a stomp box. So I could run live sound into it, whether that's my guitar, whether that's something from the Deluge, and use the granular engine or any of the other effects like the delay, the reverb, etc. So there's your versatility. And then on top of that, if I don't want to use the granular engine at all, it still has a single oscillator, so you can build additional sounds if you just need an extra voice. Now, the Deluge is awesome. The synth engine is very capable, and I use it to complement nearly every song I make. but I still wanted that warmth. I still wanted that analog. And what spoke to me in analog? Moog, of course. Now, the Mother 32 is a single oscillator, but it's got all that analog richness and that classic Moog filter, and you can get just about any sound you want out of this. I've gotten thick basses, I've got soaring leads, I've got lush pads, plus it's got super awesome generative and semi-generative options that you could patch up to make it do things that the Deluge just can't with its sequencer. The Mother 32 is basically that classic analog Moog sound that I was going for at a decent price, and I didn't need the big keyboard since I was using the Deluge to sequence it anyway. My next piece of gear, the DFAM. Now the DFAM, the drummer from Another Mother, is billed as kind of a percussive synth. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a drum machine, though it could be used as one. It is limited to 8 steps, and you only have so many voices, so if you're into like minimal drum patterns, it could certainly achieve that, and I've used it that way. What I like to do is I like to actually build my beats on the Deluge and then use the DFAM to complement it with weird percussive textures, whether that's drum based or percussion or bleeps and bloops. You can get all these weird, really cool patterns and textures out of it. And versatility wise, it's way more versatile than I would have thought. I've gotten some awesome drones at it because you can really crank the tempo, so you can get these just otherworldly drones. I've gotten sick bass lines out of it and even some melodic patterns, although tuning it to get in proper pitch is kind of a nightmare. It's just not really intended for that, but that's part of the fun of working in a semi-modular system or an analog system, is breaking the rules, right? Which leads me to the third piece in the sound studio, the Subharmonicon. Obviously there's no overlap anywhere on the planet with this thing. It's an instrument all to itself. I like to call it a happy accident machine. It creates these crazy melodic lines you'd never even think of. Although it only has 2 oscillators, each oscillator has 2 sub-oscillators, so you're effectively getting almost 6 voices out of this thing. So you could create these just crazy patterns. When you add on top of that, when you start putting in the polyrhythm generator to get these off-time beats, you just come up with these crazy melodic sequences that you probably just wouldn't naturally think of yourself. Honestly, the Moog Sound Studio, even on its own, would probably be an incredible entry into the DAW-less market as well, but paired with the Deluge, chef's kiss, my friend. Now that you've got a few synths and you've got a couple things, you're gonna run into your first problem. And that problem is, how are you gonna hear all those things? That's where you need a mixer. I went with the Tascam Model 12. Number one, first and foremost, it had more channels than I thought I would need. It has 10 ins and outs, but it also works as a DAW controller and a DAW input. Now, I haven't gone completely DAW-less. I write and compose everything completely outside of my DAW, but at the end of the day, I still like to track everything into my DAW for final mix, final master, and to just pass those sessions off to my rest of my bandmates because they are still DAW-based. The Tascam Model 12 works as a live mixer, so I can use it when I'm working. When I'm ready to record it in the DAW, all I gotta do is open up Logic and hit record, and all my ins will go right in. And if I want to use it as a kind of control surface to control the DAW, I could do that as well. Again, versatility was key. You could even record directly onto the Tascam itself with an SD card. So it's just a versatile little machine. And on top of that, actually some of the onboard effects aren't bad. I'm actually kind of a fan of the ping pong delay. Which brings me to my next piece. If you're gonna have some analog gear, especially the Moogs, you gotta have some effects. As good as the Moog sound, they don't really shine until you add effects. And for me, the ultimate effects machine was the Empress Zoia. I was enamored at first with the hologram microcosm. I love the sounds I saw coming out of that. However, it's kind of a one-trick pony. The beauty of the Zoia is I can create nearly any effect I can think of, whether that's really cool delays, really cool reverbs, loopers, you name it. But I don't have to, because there's a robust community that's already built just about any patch that you can imagine. So I can go on there and I can find effects that sound like the microcosm. I can find incredible reverbs and loopers and you name it. It's all out there. But it's also not just an effects pedal. It was a way that I could interface my guitar directly with the Deluge. I could plug in, now I have an interface to get in with some cool guitar effects to plug right into my Deluge and loop right into my Deluge. It's also synth. It's technically a modular synth. There's tons of synth patches, so if I need that extra synth or weird sound that I just can't get anywhere else, this thing does that as well. Now the last piece of my setup is the newest piece, the Pittsburgh modular Taiga. Now the Taiga on its surface looks like a typical monosynth, right? Really, it looks like a mini Moog. It's 3 oscillators, it looks like a subtractive synth, and in a lot of ways it is. You can get a lot of those sounds. It is mostly based in a kind of subtractive synthesis workflow. So why is that different from the Mother? Well, obviously the first is it has 3 oscillators, so I can get a much beefier, meatier sound. But beyond that, the cool thing about the Pittsburgh Modular Taiga is that it's both East Coast and West Coast influence. Each oscillator has a wave folder, which is distinctly Buchla, and it's also got a dynamic gate, which is basically a low-pass gate, another Buchla staple. It's kind of this mashup of the two foundational synthesis ideas and concepts mashed together, and it just makes for some really out there crazy sounds. The other thing I really love about the Taiga, having started to work in dipping my toes in the semi-modular world with the Sound Studio, is that it's fully patchable. And although it's billed as a semi-modular synth because there is a normal connection, the patch bay is extensive. You can literally patch and unpatch and repatch anything on this synth. I would say it's kind of a more intermediate or advanced semi-modular synth. It feels a lot more to me like a starter modular synth as opposed to a semi-modular synth. The way you can patch things around is just mind-bending, and I've gotten some of the craziest sounds I've ever gotten. So anyway, that's my ultimate DAW-less setup. This setup has allowed me the freedom to be able to just be in the moment and just come up with happy accidents, which was something that I really felt like I was kind of lacking in my DAW. Felt like in my DAW, everything was a very kind of directed path to creating a song. Like you had to have a very solid vision kind of to start so you'd even know what pieces you wanted to set up. With this, I can just pop on the DFAM or open the Subharmonicon and start twisting knobs and getting some weird, crazy pattern I never would have come up with. And that just never happened in the DAW, and it just kind of reignited this passion in me and this inspiration and finding these happy accidents and chasing that inspiration. The other thing that I really like about being DAW-less, particularly with my setup, where I have a lot of analog and semi-modular gear, is once I unpatch that stuff and start turning a knob, those presets are gone. They are out the window. That's forced me to really focus in on the song at hand, the one that I'm working on at that moment, and finishing it off. I'm sure all of you guys out there in YouTube land have a whole folder full of unfinished beats that were kind of cool in the moment that you're never going to get back to. This forces me to really focus in and be like, all right, let's see if we can get this song pounded out. And I just love turning knobs, and I love blinky lights. So for me, DAW-less was an awesome choice. And it might be the right choice for you too. Hopefully, if you follow some of my tips like no overlap, and versatility, you'll get the most out of whatever DAW-less setup you choose to go with. So what's your DAW-less setup look like? Leave me some comments. Tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what pieces of my gear you think are stupid and you would swap out for your own gear. I'd love to hear it. I don't have any plans on expanding at the moment, but I've always got my ear to the ground. You never know when a piece of gear is going to inspire you. And that's what I love the most about going DAW-less, is finding that one piece of gear that just inspires something new. I hope this was informative. I hope it's encouraged you to smartly set up your DAW-less setup, and I'll see you next time. Ryan out.